Hey, party people. Welcome back to my draping series. Today we are going to continue with bias drapes, but I decided that I wanted to drape something a little bit more generic so that more people can learn, as opposed to just draping something specific to my Watch Me Design series. I do want to show you something on this before we take this down. Excuse me, we're going to learn two things before we take this down. Number one, bias, when you hang bias, it falls, it stretches because the bias is not where the strength is. Okay, like when you hang garments, you have to be careful about what kinds of clothes that you hang up and which you put in a drawer. Like heavy knits, you never want to hang up because it'll start sagging and it'll start pulling at the shoulders and leave these bumps where the hanger was, like that. You never want to hang bias for a long time because it'll grow. Like, bias is not what the strength is, and it'll start stretching downwards. Thank you, gravity. And a lot of the time, people will say, well, if you're making a bias dress, you want to hang it on somewhere before you do the final hemming so that it stays straight, parallel to the floor. So you don't want to hang bias for a long time. So muslin isn't that heavy, and it wouldn't fall that much, but during the time I was not working on this, I had this pin like this, so the whole thing isn't growing. It's just a habit. It's like, oh, it's biased, just pin it up. Just don't let it just hang and like carry the whole weight of the dress. Just, okay? So that's one. Two, let's pull this down. Something I want you to notice is how close to the hip this section is. Okay, and what I want you to do is, if you want more drape in a section, like maybe I want the front to be fuller, what you want to do, and I have the green marked where the twill tape is, you want to bring it down. Do you see how automatically that brings it much fuller? Okay, and now I'm going to mark with purple. This is where the twill tape is now. That's where the twill tape is now, and that is how much fuller it is in the front. And I actually really like that. I think that looks beautiful. Okay, and conversely, if you want it really tight, like if you're draping a pencil skirt, although obviously, like, why would you drape a pencil skirt? Just one of those things where people are always asking me, like, what do I learn, pattern making or draping? It's like, it really depends on the kinds of garments you're making. Okay, if you're making a lot of fitted things like a pencil skirt, where maybe you don't even have like really interesting seam lines that you would like to see on the body before it goes on a pattern, why are you draping that? That seems like a waste of time. But if you really wanted, to pull this up, the twill tape is a little bit lower, not that much lower, but a little bit lower than where I had it before. Okay, so just to get the fullness, just bring it forward. And if you wanted it really full, you can start, because this is actually a lot of excess up here. And you can start releasing some of that fabric so that you're getting a lot of fullness in the front. I'm running out of color, so I'm going to use the red again. And now my twill tape is up here, but I'm releasing all that fullness. Like, oh no, like, I don't care. Like, it took me a long time to drape this only because I was teaching while I was doing it. I just want to show you this really quick. Here's the bias, the grain, and you see how this is coming up and curving up, adding more drape, adding more fullness. Okay, what does that look like? It's starting to look closer and closer to a circle skirt pattern, right? So you're increasing the volume at the bottom while not adding any volume at the top through gathering, shearing, whatever you want to call it. So I'm a big fan of draping with a cheap version of my final fabric. So I have pulled this little bit of Georgette, this cheap polyester Georgette, and we're going to drape a cowl. And again, on this, I have marked my grain in blue and my straight grain on blue and bias in red. Cowls are almost always draped on the bias. Cowls are most often found around the neck, like a cowl neck, little slinky little thing. Okay, you can often see us also like cowls in the back of like an evening gown like this. You can make a cowl armhole. It's not super popular right now, but you know, these things always come and go, right? You always want to fold over for your cowl because you want it to be faced, okay? You need a facing on the inside of your cowl so that the cut edge of your fabric isn't right there. There's like a little bit extra. It ends with a little bit of heaviness so that your cowl kind of stays in place better, you know? So you do want to have it fold over a little bit, but doubling the fabric completely is quite heavy. So we're going to kind of get an estimate of where we want to be with that, and then we're going to trim it. So I've trimmed some off, enough for there to be facing. And how wide you start is going to depend on how deep you want your cowl to be. You see how if I want something a bit more modest, I'm keeping it down here, which means your pattern's going to be about yay wide. Obviously double that. If you want something really low and deep, you widen your pattern, your grip, and you mark your shoulders and you see how you're creating a nice deep cowl. Maybe that's what I want. Maybe I want something sassy, okay? I do want to make sure that it is balanced and my bias is sitting in the middle. My grain line is sitting in the middle. So I'm going to let that sit. And then I'm going to pull up on the other side. I'm just going to mark the center front. And then I'm going to kind of pull this up. Okay. And just feel your drape where you want it to be. Okay. I've lost the green here a little bit, so let's go back and keep it tight. The top fold of your cowl should be parallel to your cross grain. So I lost that fold for a second. Okay, remember, we're getting this fold up here, and it should be parallel to your grain. Okay. And is it looking symmetrical? And then I want, it really depends on the silhouette you want at the sides. Like I want a skimming silhouette, not like a, like the, like if you have like put a little itty bitty cowl on top of a skin tight dress, it kind of loses the flow of the cowl and the purpose of having this soft drape up here. So I want it like skimming, but not tight. Okay, feel for your side seam back here. So first, I'm just gonna cut off a bunch of the bottom because I'm just gonna try to let it hang as naturally as possible. And then I'm gonna pin this back here so we're not like fighting with the weight of the dress. Like I don't want it tight, like it's still very like loosey and flowy here, but I am gonna pin it just so I know where the side seam is sitting. Same over here. And we're going to trim that. We could do a double cowl. We could do a cowl in the back. And now I'm going to pinch out the side seam. And this is where we're going to kind of see where the silhouette is going to sit. Pulling a little bit right there, but that's because we have so much excess fabric. So I'm just going to release it just a little bit. I don't want to get too close to where I'm pinning until I'm like, yes, this is exactly where. So I am, I am cutting some excess, but I don't want it to be like right there. And I am feeling for my side seam so that I can get an approximate placement. And I do want it, again, floaty and soft at the top. If I was doing this for real, I would be using the full-size mannequin because the weight of the fabric and the drape and all these factors, these small factors, do become amplified, and I would want to be more precise. But what is this for? The half form is for messing around. What's the difference between messing around and science? In science, we document everything. So we're just having a fashion science experiment, okay? This is for fashion, and this is for science. Okay. Now we're going to put our shoulder seam together. You're like, Zoe, that is looking like a actual garment, because it just looked like a weird crooked tent before. Sometimes things start off that way. Don't worry about it. It's the same way when I illustrate things. Like sometimes these illustrations start off looking real raggedy, especially when I first put down the base layer and I'm like building textures and embellishments on top. Like midway, you look at the illustration midway, you're like, Zoe, that looks like your pants are growing a fungus. And then like a few minutes later, you're like, oh, never mind. Okay. You're just kind of checking to make sure that looks kind of even and the seams are kind of sitting where you want them to sit. This is a little racy. This might have to be one of those styles where sometimes, because like the back is a drape and the front is a drape, it gets a little sassy. And so you end up having like a little spaghetti strap across the top just to keep everything in check, and you don't have to be constantly pulling up on your shoulders. That might be a thing. I'm just kind of feeling to make sure that like the pins are sitting and they're like draping kind of symmetrically. And yeah, this is a really like simple shape to practice on, but I promise you, when you start playing around with something this slinky, you're going to want to practice on a simple shape. Now I want armholes. So I'm looking through and I can feel the bottom of the armhole on my dress form is there. over here. So I definitely want to open it up to that point. And this is the part where it's a little harder to do on the half size because then now your armholes are so small. That's not the shape of my armhole. I just had to clean this up so y'all can see an armhole shape taking place. And this is where you would draw one in. So my back armhole is back here. And now you have these notes for when you transfer your drape. That's, I have this pinned up here. Like that. I'm going to carve it out a little bit more in the front. Armholes should always be carved out more in the front because that follows our natural arm movements. See now? There's your armhole. And there you are, your first double cowl bias cut dress. Give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new today. Share, subscribe so you can keep track of the rest of my draping series. And I will see you in the next video.